Did you know there are four men in your psyche, in your brain, in your mind right now? I know that sounds weird. There are four men. What are you talking about? So in Jungian psychology, there's something called archetypes. And archetypes are universal patterns that have been seen throughout history and stories and in just our own being. So for example, think of a hero, right? The hero archetype is something that everybody knows. It's Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. It's Ripley in Alien. They're the hero, right? The hero of that entire story. That is an archetype. You could replace that person with anybody else and the archetype would be the same. They go through what Joseph Campbell calls the hero's journey, and it follows that same pattern. So in men, in the masculine psyche, we have the same thing, but specifically we have four archetypes. And the four masculine archetypes are the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And these four encompass all of the functions of masculinity. Nathan, why does this matter? Why are you teaching me this? Because the masculine archetypes are inside of you. They are inside of you. The more you know about the masculine archetypes, the more you will understand yourself, the more you'll be able to harness the gifts of the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. If that doesn't convince you, you'll be able to identify why your coworker might be such a shithead. So there you go. Fine, get on with it, get on with it. There are four masculine archetypes, and there's even a counterpart in women. So think of the king, there's a queen, and a woman. However, for the sake of this video, we're only going to be focusing on the masculine. These concepts were developed by Robert Moore, a Jungian psychoanalyst, and the book he wrote, and you can check out, and it's an introduction to all of what I'm talking about, is the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. It was written by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette, so you'll know where I got my information from. Robert Moore spent a chunk of his life, a huge decades of his life, studying this material. I'm simply distilling it into the simplest concepts and have spent about 40 plus hours listening to his lectures on the king, warrior, magician, lover archetypes and masculinity. And I'm making this video to simplify it because we don't want all that information to be up here in theory. We want to be able to apply it. So you being able to understand these concepts within yourself, I believe is really going to help out the evolution of masculinity. So how does this work? How is it that we have four male archetypes within our psyche? So the king, warrior, the magician, and the lover look differently in every man. For example, some men have a stronger warrior archetype. They're more in touch with their warrior. And we know this, right? We know people like David Goggins, who if you think of a modern day warrior, he is an embodiment of the warrior archetype. And you might see that his lover archetype, and it's not hard to understand what lover might represent. I'll get into that more later. You can see that sensitivity, that empathy, compassion is actually dulled in him. Yet we have other men who are so in their lover energy. They're artists, musicians, they're creative, they're the lovers of this world, the mystics, spiritual teachers. Yet maybe he lacks discipline, maybe he doesn't have that aggression, that warrior. So in every man, there are different configurations and strengths that we have of each archetype. And each archetype has a specific role in the masculine psyche. Each individual archetype has a bipolar shadow. By bipolar shadow, I mean they have a positive pole and a negative pole, the active pole and the passive pole. And then they have the full generative, the peak, what is called the archetype in its fullness, or the archetype in its healthiest function. And we slide from shadow pole to shadow pole until we reach healthy masculinity within that archetype. You can examine the image right here. You can see that there's a triangle, there's a positive, there's an active side to the triangle when there's too much of that archetype, and there's a passive pole of that archetype, what is called the passive shadow pole, and that's that there's too little of that archetype in that person. So with that in mind, just remember simply that there are good aspects to the archetype, and there are also very bad aspects to the archetype, depending if you have too little or too much of that archetype. I want to put emphasis on what I'm about to say. At all times, we are sliding from different poles, into healthiness. We're never just in the healthy side of an archetype. We're constantly fluctuating, just like any human, right? Sometimes we go too far into this, too little into this. Sometimes we're a little too aggressive, sometimes we're too passive. It's the same thing. The goal here is to do our best to live in our healthiest expression of that archetype. We want to be in our healthy warrior energy. We want to be in our healthy lover energy, and so on and so forth. Before I start the bulk of this video, I want to say I did make a masculinity archetype quiz. It's down in the link below. You can take it. The way I've created the questions, so when you get your result, it'll show you what archetype you need the most. It doesn't mean it's your weakest archetype. It means right now, in the situation you're in, this is your focus. This is where you should concentrate your energy on. And not to be cocky, I think it's one of the best quizzes out there. It's not too long, it's not too short, and I've literally taken those questions, distilled it down from the hours and hours of Robert Moore's lectures into these simplified, easy to understand questions. You can take it at the end of this video, take it now, come back to this video, and if anything, you could go back to it in a few months and see where you've evolved. So definitely check that out when you can. We're starting with the crown of masculinity, the king archetype, the central and most important archetype of the male psyche. The king has mastery over the other three masculine archetypes. He has mastery over his ego, so he is in service of others. He represents order amongst chaos. He represents fertility. He is in service of others, or the realm, right? He's the king. He represents the ordering principle, the generative principle. He provides blessing. He blesses his knights. So we think of that wise older man. And you know, when we get his approval, it's like a blessing from the king himself. When the king is healthy, the land is healthy, the land is fertile. Like in Lion King, right? When Simba comes back, the true real king, the land goes back to being fertile. I'm going to go more into depth about the king in his fullness. But first, let's talk about the bipolar shadows, the shadow side of the king. The Tyrant King is the active shadow pole of the king archetype. The Tyrant King is just like what it sounds like. The Tyrant King is in service of himself, not the realm. He only cares about furthering his agenda, furthering his status, furthering his power. He grows his power out of selfishness, not out of service. While the king represents order amidst chaos, the tyrant has no inner order, no inner structure. It's why he's so chaotic. And in his lack of inner structure, he takes it out on others. Because of his lack, he feels insecure. So he has to be a tyrant. He has to amass as much power as possible. Think of a narcissist. A narcissist is so lacking within that he has to take. Narcissists are takers. A tyrant is a taker. The Tyrant King is afraid of someone new taking over his power. He doesn't know how to release the power of the king. He believes he is the king archetype. Instead of representing the king, which is what the king in his fullness is supposed to do, he knows he's above his ego. The true king knows that he is not the king himself. He's simply a representation of the king energy. He's a symbol for the people. He knows his power has been given from God. He knows that he is not God himself. The Tyrant King believes himself God level, God status. And we've seen what happens to people who believe they're on that level. They can't give that power away. They're threatened by the new. They want to squash the new. They want to kill the new. I'm going to use the Lion King as an example again. This is Scar. Scar is a Tyrant King. When he kills his brother and he banishes Simba, he becomes a complete tyrant. He doesn't know how to run a kingdom properly. It's just me. He takes. So the kingdom is full of death, it's desolate, it's barren, it's not fertile, and he doesn't know how to give away his power. He doesn't want to give away his power. And everything falls into chaos because he's in the Tyrant King, in the active shadow pole of the king. The weakling or the Weakling King is a passive shadow pole of the king archetype. You'll start to notice that they have similarities between the active and shadow pole. So pay attention. The Weakling King lacks the king energy. He's passive. He gives away his power. He doesn't want to take the responsibility of being a king. He's a coward. He runs away from responsibility. He feels weak. He looks weak. And this weakness comes from a deep insecurity within himself. Just like the tyrant, he doesn't have the inner structures within himself to feel confident enough to embody the king energy. The Weakling King gives away his power. You know, we see in movies or stories where a king is cowardly, he has no spine, and he gives away his power to his advisors or other people that manipulate him, and He wants them to take all the power. He doesn't want it. He wants to have fun, or he wants to run away from battle. He doesn't want to be at the forefront. Another interesting thing about the weakling is when actually given power, like in a man that has this weakling power, he can oftentimes become a bully. For example, let's say a nerdy guy that gets picked on all throughout school. He's a little weak, he doesn't have a backbone, he doesn't stand up for himself, and suddenly he becomes successful, rich. He feels a vengeance within him. He takes it out. But then he goes back to being weak. Like, it never took away that he's weak. It's just that now he has his power. He's going to erupt in some violence. And usually a weakling, when pushed just enough, they do erupt in sudden aggression, sudden violence. They blow up. It's that guy that looks very passive, very weak, very pacifist, and then suddenly that guy, you push him the right way, it's like a demon comes out of him. This can often be attributed to the weakling. If you notice, both the tyrant and the weakling are based off fear. They both have fear, and the tyrant is really a weakling underneath all of that. He is weak, and that's why he must become a tyrant, to compensate for that weakness within himself. Now, the king in his fullness, which is the highest iteration of the king, the healthiest aspects of the king, is a king that is centered around God and love, which is the opposite of what the weakling and the tyrant represent. The God in his fullness opposes the ego inflation of the tyrant. His ego is not inflated. He does not believe he is God. He does not believe he himself is the king. He opposes the deflation of the weakling. He's not weak. He does have a spine. He's not spineless. The king in his fullness embodies the balance between these two forces. He has the inner structures that enable him to be the king, to see himself as a representation of the king energy. He knows that his time will end. I'm going to use the Lion King again because it's just such a great example of this archetype. Mufasa is the king in his fullness. Mufasa literally means king or ruler in Swahili. I didn't know that. Maybe this is common for people to know, but I didn't know Mufasa meant that. It's a very intentional choice to choose the word Mufasa, king, as the character's name, because Mufasa represents fertility. He represents strength. He's strong. He knows how to balance the forces. He guides his son. The only thing Mufasa really did wrong was not see the evil in his brother Scar. He was a little too compassionate. He should have gotten rid of the evil. But again, no king is perfect. Another great example of the king archetype, and this is one of my all-time favorite characters, is Duke Leto Atreides from Dune. So this is Paul's father. If you haven't watched Dune, that's okay. I'm going to describe him. So Duke Leto is intelligent. He's highly intelligent, yet he's super compassionate. He doesn't use it for evil. He's a balanced ruler. He's well received. He's loved by the Empire. Well, no, not the Empire. He's loved by his planet. He's loved by a lot of people. Duke Leto acts from integrity. He's full of integrity. So this integrity gains respect from his people. It's why he starts to gain power. And not to spoil it, like if you care about spoilers, skip this part, skip the next 10 seconds or so. But because of that, he gets envy from the emperor himself. And the emperor is possessed by the tyrant and the weakling, shadow poles of the king. Can't stand to see someone else shining, someone else new coming along. Even though Duke Leto is so good, he doesn't see himself. Even though Duke Leto has no intention of taking over the Empire, the shadow pole still wants to get rid of this new king. If you haven't watched it, I really recommend Dune. It's a great sci-fi movie. Now, it's not for everybody, but hey, if you ever watch a movie again, you can start to examine how these archetypes work. It's kind of incredible how they are in everything we watch, everything we consume. Our psyche naturally is drawn to these archetypes. You'll start to notice these patterns and really start to notice even right now who your favorite characters are. What kind of archetype do they fall into? It'll definitely say something about you if you have a certain pattern, a certain type of character that seem to be always your favorite. As for me, mine tend to be the king archetype, the magician archetype, but overall, throughout my childhood, I'd say the king archetype was one that I felt most drawn to, who my favorite characters, who always embodied these ideals, these principles. That's why as a kid, The Lion King was my favorite movie. So what was your favorite movie as a kid, and what are your favorite characters right now? Maybe you've always liked you, maybe you've always been attracted to those attributes. Next up is the warrior archetype, and it's the easiest to understand. It's literally in the title. I really believe men have the easiest time with this archetype, at least understanding it, because countless civilizations, tribes have been built off the warrior code. And it's easy to see that ancient Japanese, the samurai, were an extreme example of the warrior in that civilization. The warrior archetype is the doing, it's the action, it's the aggression. And I want to emphasize, aggression doesn't mean violence, it doesn't mean bad. I don't want us to get bogged down on good or bad. Aggression here means the vital force, it's the push of the vital force into action. So the warrior embodies this aggression for life, this zest. Now I wouldn't call it zest, this doing of life. It's the discipline, it's the David Goggins basically. It's a do. You are on a mission. There are principles, you follow a set of principles and you act on them. The warrior is able to detach. There's a detachment because you have to detach a little bit in order to get the thing done. Sometimes you have to detach from your emotions. You have to detach from things that are trying to bog you down. It's like, let's hyper focus and get this done. Let's concentrate, detach, and get in the flow of doing. The active shadow pole of the warrior is the sadist. Thankfully, this is also easy to understand because the sadist is what it sounds like. It's a man in his bloodlust. It's a man who inflicts pain. This detachment I talked about earlier, that is a marker of the warrior. When you go too far into the detachment, we can detach from empathy, from compassion. The sadist is too much in the warrior energy, so therefore he has too much in the detachment. The sadist represents cruelty, and the cruelty comes into two forms. The cruelty can be with passion, and the cruelty can be without passion. The cruelty with passion is what we see in war. It's bloodlust. It's what we see in the Vietnam War. The berserker style, very in a frenzy. The sadist with cruelty and passion is someone who doesn't even know what he's doing. He's just in the moment. While cruelty without passion is calculated, cold. It's what the Nazis did during the Holocaust. It was just like another day, following orders. He was so detached, committing these cruel acts, committing these horrific acts, and it was just another day, another procedure. These are two aspects of cruelty from the sadist. The sadist warrior is also someone who hates anything that he perceives as weakness, anything he perceives as softness. Sadly, we see this a lot in our modern day. We see this when a man, a father, sees his son crying and bullies him into not crying, bullies him, saying he's a wuss, and a bunch of other worse things that I'm sure a lot of us have heard in our lives. The reason he hates weakness is because he has weakness within himself. He hates that weakness within him, so he must attack it. In a way, he's attacking himself, but he's attacking it outside. The sadist is truly, genuinely insecure. He's probably not even aware he's insecure, but he's deeply insecure. Another manifestation of the sadist is a man who just works. He's on the grind. He doesn't stop. It's almost like he's punishing himself in a way. He's so detached from life. He's focusing on that one thing to the point of obsession, to the point of his relationships collapsing. He's so far gone. He doesn't care if his marriage fails. He doesn't care if he neglects his children. He doesn't care who he hurts along the process. He's so focused, so honed in on that one thing, on the mission. Most of the time, this man is seeking external validation because, again, his inner structures, he's not secure within himself. So he's seeking something outside of himself by accomplishing these missions. Now, the sadist pushes himself. He pushes himself until he finally snaps. There's only so much a person can take from that. And when he snaps, all hell breaks loose, obviously. Many men fall into this shadow archetype. And it's okay if you recognize this within yourself, even within myself at times. It doesn't have to look like that, like the examples that I gave were a bit extreme, just to paint the picture. Maybe here and there we fall into the shadow archetype of this warrior. But it'd be good to start to notice, where does this exist in our society? And you'll start to see how common this is, this dysfunction, and how it can often lead men to ruin. On the other side is the masochist. This is the passive shadow pole of the warrior archetype. The masochist is self-punishing. Again, it sounds like what it sounds like. It is a man who punishes himself. He has too little of the warrior archetype, so he lacks power. He lacks action. He often seeks things that hurt him, and oftentimes the Masochist actually goes into the sadist. They're just kind of bouncing off each other. The masochist, an example I can think of is a masochist is someone who follows a cult leader. He gives away his power to the cult. He gives away his power to that one leader. He doesn't see himself as a warrior, as a strong masculine figure. So instead he gives it away. He projects his warrior energy onto someone else. Someone else holds the power for him. Man, and we do see this in society. We see a lot of people projecting their warrior they're doing onto someone else. Someone else is going to fix your problem. Someone else is going to be the answer, when really the warrior is within yourself. The king is within yourself. All these archetypes are within yourself. But oftentimes, even though it's not just the warrior, I'm saying it for all the archetypes, people will project their own power onto a figure. This is how cult of personalities happen. This is how cults happen. This is how people give themselves away. But besides that tangent, the masochist gives away his power. The man possessed by the masochist is a man who feels defeated even before he's started. It's a man who gives up before trying. This is what the sadist looks like in the warrior archetype. The warrior archetype in its fullness is loyal to the king. He's centered around something. He's following principles. He's following the king. The warrior in his fullness is courageous, loyal, decisive, disciplined. The reason he goes out there and does is for the greater good of the humanity. The warrior follows a code of honor. The warrior in its fullness has structure. Unlike the shadows we just went over, the warrior has a center, and his center is the king. A good example of the warrior archetype is King Leonidas from 300. His archetype was mixed because he was a king as well as a warrior, but this is a great example of how they work on each other. He's a warrior because he's there, he's doing, he's acting, and his actions center around, well, himself, but what he represents. Sparta, the 300 men, the women and the children waiting. King Leonidas is such a great example of the warrior archetype and the king archetype. The next archetype is the magician. The magician represents mastery over a knowledge, a craft. He is the master of knowing, of esoteric information. The magician can look many ways, multiple ways. It can be the shaman, the ritual elder, something more spiritual, metaphysical. But it could also be the electrician, the engineer, because all of those have one thing in common, is that it takes time, it takes skill, it takes dedication to learn a skill set. The magician also understands unseen forces, the deep unconscious, the things that people don't see. He's able to see things clearly, what most people aren't able to see. And because he's able to see these forces, he's able to harness them, he's able to understand, he dissects. And through his dissection, he understands. And when he understands, he's able to channel it, able to have mastery over it, over the craft, over whatever that thing is. There are two main aspects to the magician. It is technological advancement and it's spiritual transformation. Technological advancement is easy to understand, it's easy to see. We live in a magician era right now. The amount of technology that has come out in the last 100, 200 years is insane. Now the other side of it is spiritual transformation. It's the shaman, the ritual elder, the one who initiates others into their journey. This sadly is missing in our society. We have a lot of the technology, not a lot of the spiritual transformation. And you see that's why we're very imbalanced in the society, because we need a little bit more of that. We need more understanding of the unseen forces, the metaphysical, the esoteric. To summarize, the two main aspects of the magician is technological transformation and spiritual transformation. The active shadow pole of the magician is the detached manipulator. The detached manipulator is full of greed. He's cynical. He feels superior. He often has a superiority complex. And we see this in our modern day, right? Where because we have mastery over nature, well, we don't have mastery over nature, but it seems like we have mastery over nature through our technological advancements. The detached manipulator doesn't care about the consequences. That's why there's pollution, there's clear cutting of trees, pristine rainforests, there's been mass extinctions. The detached manipulator does not care. He uses his knowledge and he doesn't use it in a balanced way, in a way that is compassionate, in a way that benefits everyone. The detached manipulator only wants to benefit himself. The detached manipulator believes everyone is phony. everybody is false, that there is no king, there's no king to follow. Therefore, he's following his own thing. He's trying to feed his ego. That's a detached manipulator, a man with a full ego, and the way he feeds his ego is by feeding himself information and knowledge, so he can feel superior to others because he knows so much, because he hoards the knowledge, because he wants to be the one that knows the most, not because he wants to benefit humanity, but because he wants to feed his complex, his superiority complex. He's feeding himself. And why is he feeding himself? Because he's insecure, because he knows he lacks the vital force, because he doesn't have a king to follow, because he believes everyone is false. The detached manipulator lives in his mind. It's a man who, like I said, is in his ego. The detached manipulator weaponizes his knowledge. He's trying to know the best. He's trying to know more than you. He wants to know more than you. He has to dominate you. A really good example of a detached manipulator is Martin Shkreli. I'm mispronouncing that, but you'll know. I'll put the picture up, and if you don't know, look him up, look the case up. But this man, he was literally labeled one of the most hated men in America, if not the most hated man in America. He went from selling this $14 pill to $750 per pill. That is a perfect example of the detached manipulator. He manipulated the price of this AIDS life-saving medication from $14 to $750 for one pill. That is a man who only cares about himself. He had knowledge. He wanted to buy that. He knew he could make money, and he went to the extreme about not caring who's on the other side of buying that pill, and inflated the price to $750 a pill. This is a man who used his knowledge for evil, for selfishness, for greed. On the other side of the magician archetype is a passive shadow pole called the innocent one. The innocent one lacks the magician energy. The innocent one is hard to detect. I'd say out of all these archetypes, it's the hardest one to really detect because he relies on his naivete, on his innocence to manipulate. It's your classic gaslighter. He doesn't know what you're talking about. I'm not talking crap about you. I'm not criticizing you because I'm envious of you or anything. I'm being honest. I'm being blunt, or hey, I don't know what you're talking about. That type of guy. The innocent one in the magician archetype lacks the knowledge. The innocent one is a man that wants power and status, but he doesn't want to put the work in. It's that guy who desires it. Maybe secretly, he doesn't want to show that he wants it. He probably is like, nah, I don't actually want it. But secretly, he does want it. But he knows he lacks the vitality. He lacks the discipline. He lacks the drive to actually get it done. Because he lacks the drive, because he doesn't actually commit to the actions, he's hateful of others who are able to do what he wants to do. He's envious of others that have the status and the power, who have mastery over the craft. And oftentimes the innocent one will know just enough. He'll do enough work to sabotage those around him. And he'll play the naive card, the innocent, like, I don't know what you're talking about. He'll give false information. He'll give snide remarks. He'll try to pull people down because he doesn't want anyone else to do better than him. Like I said earlier, the innocent one is your classic gaslighter, and we've all come across this person. I'm sure you're probably thinking right now, man, I know a guy who was like that. It's like you can't put your finger on it. You can't really like aggressively confront him because it'll make you look like crazy because he's doing it in such a snide, sneaky way. This is the innocent one. Another example of this dysfunctional pole is the guy who picks up a hobby, picks a business model, and just as quickly as he picked it, he gives up. He gives up because he can't follow through. He gets bored. But when he sees someone else be successful at the same thing he tried to do, he becomes a hater. He's probably the one spamming my YouTube comments right now. I'm playing, I'm joking. He's probably the one lurking and just hating on you, giving you bad energy. But just know that it's because he lacks the drive. He's envious, he's jealous, he's a hater. Moving on to the Magician in its Fullness. He has the capacity to observe. He has the capacity to detach in the way that he's able to tap into his observing ego. It's called the observing ego. The observing ego is basically when you're just watching your thoughts, When we're in meditation, we're supposed to observe our thoughts, right? We're separating ourselves and we're watching ourselves think. We're watching where our mind is going. The Magician in his fullness has mastery over this. He knows how to detach and just observe. And because he knows how to detach, because he knows how to be in the observing ego, he's able to see things more objectively. The observing ego watches. The ego itself takes the action. The ego is a part of ourselves that executes the day-to-day essential functions, or the thinking functions, kind of like, okay, what are we doing? What's the goal? How do we get to that goal? The ego runs in trouble, however, when it runs into an archetype. Archetypes want to possess the ego. Just think of the archetypes like all vying for power, right? It's like a board meeting. The ego is the chairman, and the 4 archetypes are the board members, and they're like, no, listen to me, no, listen to me. The magician's role in this, in its fullness, in its fullest capacity, in its healthiest expression, he knows when you need a little bit more warrior. Let's say you need to get something done. All right, you need more warrior energy. Let's tap into that power line. Or maybe you're dating a girl. Okay, let's step into the lover. Forget the discipline, forget the overthinking, forget all that. Just be present with your woman. So the magician, because he's able to tap into the observing ego, he can direct and channel who gets the spotlight and who gets thrown into the back seat. So the magician archetype, even though he's a board member, he works along the ego to regulate the psyche. He helps the ego regulate it. Because the magician knows, because he has that ability to know, he has the inner wisdom. He knows that it's better if we work along the psyche. Let's not possess him, let's not overtake him. And by possession, I mean getting into those shadow poles. When we get into the shadow poles, usually because we become possessed by a certain archetype. Because of this capacity, the magician knows how to channel this raw power, because archetypes are raw power. I didn't say it earlier, but we're never the archetype, okay? We're never the archetype. Like I said, the king knows he's not the king. So we are not the warrior. We're not the magician. We're simply tapping into that energy. Like our ego's tapping into that power line. We're not the whole nuclear reactor of what is an archetype. I'll go into that in a whole other video, what archetypal possession is and how that looks like. For this video, it's just simply I'm explaining what the archetypes actually are. The magician also represents introspection and sacred space. Now, introspection, because usually we get our greatest moments, our greatest ideas, our greatest aha moments in introspection, when we're in quiet, when we're in solitude. I don't know about you, but me, when I need that solitude, when I need that sacred space, I feel, I'm like, okay, I feel like I just need to shut out the world for a little bit. I need some quietness, especially in this modern day where there's so much going on. We're on our phones, there's 1,000 things going on our screens. We're working all the time. There's opinions everywhere. Sometimes we just feel called to, hey, I need to go out and camp, or I need to hike, I need to be alone, I just need to be away from my family or my wife, my kids, my work. I need to just be by myself for a little bit. I feel like every man feels that, to know, hey, I need some time to myself. I need to just be with myself, with my thoughts. And usually in that sacred space, we know we gotta create it. And there's different ways to create it. Some men tap into it with music. Some men tap into it when playing an instrument. Some men literally make a sacred space for themselves, the man cave, right? And usually what happens when we tap into that sacred space, we come out of it almost a different man with a new realization. We know what the problem is, and we know what steps to take to alleviate that problem. The magician is the creator of the sacred space. The magician comes out especially in sacred space. The magician in its fullness, the thing that guides him is he wants to better the world. He becomes the guide to direct the world in a better direction. So think of Gandalf, right, from Lord of the Rings. Gandalf is powerful. He is a badass. But what does he do? He guides, right? He doesn't really use his power all that much. He does, but overall he knows how to guide. And it's funny because you'll see the archetypes in the Lord of the Rings. You have the king, and you could say the lover, priest. Not gonna get into it, but basically you can see that he knows how to take those energies and put them in the right direction. He's like, here you go. He's such a guide. He has all this knowledge and he knows how to direct it. He also has the capacity to see evil like right in its face, and he has discernment. The magician has discernment. So Gandalf discerns this is evil, and he does his damnedest to stop it. The next and final archetype is the lover. The lover represents passion, vitality, deep meaning. The lover is in touch with the senses, the sensory world. He is both dominated and dominating the senses, the sensory world. He feels oneness. He feels together with nature. I'm sure most of us have experienced it. We're out in the woods, out somewhere beautiful, pristine, at a lake, a waterfall, and we just feel like we're just one with the plants, one with the birds. We hear the chirping. We realize we're a part of the earth. That moment is when we become in touch with the lover. The lover is able to connect to what is called the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious, basically the memories of all people that have lived. It sounds a little woo. You can Google it. It's a very well-known concept in Jungian psychology. But basically, the collective unconscious is a gathering of information. It's unconscious information that we just know, that we're able to tap into. So the lover is able to tap into that. And that's why he feels so one, so together with the world. The lover is deeply associated with mysticism and intuition. The lover bypasses intellectual capacities. He is all about presence. He is about meaning. He's about feeling. And feeling doesn't always mean good, okay? It could be heartbreak. It could be love, like actual love. It could be sensuality, passion. It could be grief. It's the entirety. It's a spectrum of emotions. It's everything being in it. There are two main forms of the lover: the artist and the psychic. So we have the artist, the flowing, the creativity. The lover is also creativity. And we have the psychic, which is the intuitive faculties. It's the togetherness, the mysticism. And every religion, especially the major ones, have a mystic realm to it, right? Like the Orthodox Christians, the Sufi Muslims, the Kabbalah. There's a mystic realm to it, and that is the realm of the lover. And obviously, like, the lover also represents love, passion, sexuality. I just don't want us to get bogged down in just that aspect, because there's so much more to the lover than just sex. Some examples of the lover, men in their lover energy, is a coffee connoisseur, the wife connoisseur, the man who loves cars, the car lover. He sees the beauty, the shape of the car. He's able to appreciate what's in the car. That is actually the realm of the lover. The active shadow pole of the lover is called the addict. The addict has become dominated by the sensory world. He is in it. He's addicted to the senses. He's addicted to pleasure. He can't get enough of it. The addicted lover is ultimately a man who is living for his own pleasure. He can't escape it. He's a man who's unable to detach from his own feelings. He's so entangled with them. He's a man who's trying to reach the ultimate ecstasy, whether through sexuality, sensuality, through mysticism and spirituality. This is a man who's searching and searching. He's craving so much until he finds that ultimate moment. Good examples of this are drug addicts, sex addicts. They are looking to get their fix, right? Each time they want more. They want more. They want to experience that ultimate high. Yet they never really reach that ultimate high. And the same with guys who are in relationship after relationship with women. They go woman to woman, and once they get to know her, they're in love, right? They're in love with the idea of this woman. This is a perfect woman. They have this fantasy of this woman. She's going to complete me. And then once they actually date her, get to know her, it's like the reality of her, her flaws, her flesh. That fantasy becomes shattered. It shatters, and he leaves. And he goes on to the next woman. It repeats the pattern over and over, trying to find that perfect woman, that perfect fantasy. The addict wants to experience God and oneness, and he's stubborn. He believes that experience that oneness, that ultimate ecstasy, he has to dive deeper and deeper into his sensuality. When it's really the opposite. What he needs are boundaries. He doesn't need more attachment. He doesn't need to become more and more inside that sensuality. What he needs is to step back from the sensual, from the senses. because the lover can tap into those deep unconscious forces. He gets lost. It's really easy to get lost in the force of the deep unconscious. Ultimately, this is a man that prioritizes his own addictions, his own pleasure. And we all know men like that, right? Like, think of commonly what is called a mama's boy, right? Mommy took care of everything, so now he just cares about himself, his own pleasure, his own play. He doesn't have any responsibilities. He just wants to have a good time. He's forever a boy, basically. The passive shadow pole of the lover is the impotent. This shadow pole lacks the lover energies. This is a man that lacks enthusiasm, lacks vitality, he lacks passion, zest for his life. The impotent feels cut off. He feels cut off from himself, and he feels cut off from the world. And this could be for a variety of reasons. It could be from stress, it could be from emasculation, it could be from depression. This can sometimes happen when we're too much in our warrior energy or magician energy. We're so focused on the goal, so focused on the mission, that we start to disconnect from our own feelings, start to disconnect from our own world. And so we lack that passion. We start to not be interested in our sexual wellness. We start not to be interested in relationships. We don't want love. We start to feel disconnected from the meaning of our lives. An excellent example of this is, think of that like brilliant, geeky guy. He has mastery over his knowledge. He knows his shit. He knows it, but he doesn't have game. He doesn't feel confident about himself in that realm. So he justifies himself. I don't need women. I am just gonna focus on my one hobby, on my one thing I'm really good at. Instead, he gravitates towards pornography, and he uses that as an outlet. He uses that to replace actual intimacy, actual love. This is a really good example of the impotent, because it's not that he doesn't want it. It's just that he's so disconnected from it. He's so disconnected from himself and his actual desires, and he's so into that one hobby, that one thing he's really good at, that he essentially made himself impotent, like literally impotent. The lover archetype in its fullness balances out the other three archetypes. If you notice, the lover is the most different out of the three archetypes. It's not detached like the warrior or the magician. Even the king, instead of boundaries, he doesn't have boundaries. Like, he's in it, he's together, he's bounded by the world. He doesn't have boundaries because he's in it, he's in the presence of it. Instead of discipline and standards and principles, he's unconventional. He's about passion. And you would think, well, that seems like the opposite of what masculinity is. Not at all. The lover is what gives meaning to the other archetypes. Without the lover, they would fall into dysfunction. The king would become the tyrant. Why would the king be a good king if he didn't care, if he didn't love? So the lover gives love to each archetype, and that's how they become in their fullness. Without the lover, all of this would be meaningless. It would be meaningless. There would be no point. He gives each archetype meaning. He gives them service. He keeps them connected to each other. In the modern day, it seems a lot of us are disconnected from the lover. Either that or we're too much in the lover and there's a lot of addiction. But the lover really is such an important archetype, even though we tend to ignore it. I tend to ignore it, neglect it, because it is what fuels us. It is what fuels our king. It is what fuels our warrior. It is what fuels our magician. It balances us out. It is the father loving his children. It is a man serving the world because he loves it. And with that, those are the four masculine archetypes. I know this is a long video, and I really appreciate it if you've stuck around throughout this entire thing, because it is a lot of information. However, I'm confident that this knowledge will help every man, every woman out there. You'll know yourself better. You'll know the world better. You'll know when you need to balance out. You'll know when you're lacking something. I need a little bit more force, a little bit more love, a little bit more discipline, a little bit more order. You'll understand why there are people that are the way they are. You'll understand why that coworker is an asshole. And if you're someone that prefers the written word or wants to know more about the masculine archetypes, I'm working on a blog series right now on the King Warrior Magician Lover. You can check it out in the link down below. When you sign up, you'll get it for free directly to your inbox. And a reminder, in case you forgot, I do have a quiz that I made. You can check it out down below. Again, there's a link where you can take the quiz. Check that out and let me know what you got, because I'm really curious. I love getting to know what people's results are. It says a lot about a person. But right now, personally, I feel I'm in my magician era, doing my best to gain mastery over certain topics. I'm trying to bring that onto this channel. So subscribe if you want more like this. I want to thank you for watching. I appreciate you staying all the way in, and I'll catch you in the next video.